I think we're live. Hello, Ps Unami. Good to see you today. Welcome.
Hello, Elvis. Thank you very much.
This is Gift and Story Pod. I think how I came up with the name is I've actually plagiarized. Somebody was preaching a sermon around everybody has a gift and everybody has got a story, and it's about telling a story through the gift that God has actually given you.
Yes.
And I just thought that was a very cool sermon title, and I decided to steal it because I don't think that person will ever know that this podcast exists anyway. So that's why
You're surprised.
that's why I chose this as a title. But hey, it's good to have you here. You wear several hats. Of course, you're senior pastor at our church. You a wife. You're a mom. You've got work that you do as well.
Yes.
Would you like to introduce yourself to the viewers or the listeners in terms of who you really are, and how you got here?
Okay. So I'm Unami. I'm originally from Botswana in Southern Africa. And yes, I'm here in Perth in Western Australia. And yeah, I am a wife, a mother to 4 children, and yes, pastor as well, and psychologist, and a few other little bits and pieces that I do
Right.
here and there. Yes.
Now, I'll be honest. You said psychologist, and this word confuses me because you got psychologist and you got a therapist and you got a psychiatrist. What's the distinction between these three?
Okay, so a therapist is essentially anyone who does therapy. So psychologists are therapists, and psychiatrists are also therapists. So therapist is kind of more a generic term. The difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist is that psychiatrists are medically trained. They're doctors. Especially in Australia, it's different in America. So in Australia, psychiatrists are the only ones who can prescribe medication. So they do both mental health and the medical side of things, whereas psychologists don't, they're not doctors, so they don't prescribe medication. But I believe in America, it's a bit different. Psychologists or certain psychologists can prescribe. I'm guessing they probably do medicine as well.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I feel like we've begun on a very serious note, and I don't like that. So I think
Okay.
let's tone it down a little bit. Let's give you a bit of a challenge that will wake you up and get the juices up and ready to go.
All right. I'm up for it.
I've got some trivia question here now. If you don't get it right, don't worry. This is probably, just think of it as if there were 100 questions, you probably would have gotten the other 99, and then maybe you don't get this one, right? So I've got a trivia question. This trivia question is you know about it. It's basically the guess the year trivia. I'm going to give you 3 hints. Think about it for a second, and then tell me which year you think these events actually happened in. Okay, I'll start with the easier one. YouTube, which you know, launches in February of this year. Okay, now as you keep thinking about when YouTube was launched, in this year also, Iraq held its first democratic elections after the fall of Saddam Hussein. And this was in January when the elections were held. And then the final clue, are you having a hint so far?
Not really.
Even if it's just a range.
Yes, I'm going to just guess, right? Because
okay, let me give you a final hint.
Yeah,
Final hint. And this hopefully should help a lot. It could probably remind you where you are. In this year, Pope Benedict XVI replaced Pope John Paul II in April of this year.
Oh, that did not help at all. But
okay.
I know none of those answers, but I would guess 2010.
Oh my, okay. Okay. Let me ask you. You did not have YouTube. You did not have YouTube on your phone in 2009?
2009.
I'm sure you played YouTube into the
Look, in 2009, I was having my 3rd baby. So I do not remember.
Gotcha.
I'm very bad at these things.
Right. Okay. No, that's all good. That's 2005 was the
Oh,
year. Yeah.
that's when I had my
I
first
remember
baby.
where I was because I just finished my high school. It was at Gap year, and yeah, I was actually on the farm
Oh,
when we had the Pope Benedict
oh,
taking over.
wow.
We were waiting for the
Okay.
white smoke. We're always like, if you see white smoke in your neighbor's house, you're like, maybe it's significant of a white smoke in the
Mm,
whatever the is that the Italian city where they choose the Pope from. Okay, now that's hopefully sort of made it a bit lighter for you. There's a lady known as Dr. Anita Phillips. I don't know if you're aware of her, but she's somebody I've been following for quite a bit. I think she actually took over leadership of a church in LA, and she's
okay.
authored a very good book. It's called The Garden Within. I haven't read it. I'm actually hoping to buy it this week and read
Mm,
it. Um, but the way when you read sort of the story behind the book, I think she describes a few different comparisons of like how um, the human anatomy has a close semblance to just like the like a garden and how it's being uh,
right.
tended after or looked after. I
Hmm.
just wanted to get your thoughts on, is there a way the human brain mind or the person of a human can be compared to a garden and how you take care of that garden?
Yes, look, I'm familiar with her. I haven't read the book. I've
Mhm.
only, had listened to a podcast where she was interviewed. And I guess when I think about that whole concept, it's really going back to the human mind and the human heart. When you think about it in terms of psychological terms, there is a lot that we carry, and it kind of sits in that space. When you think about our mental wellness, our social and emotional well-being, it's very much dependent on what's happening in our minds and what's going on in our hearts. And it's like, I guess that concept about the garden, I don't know if I'm quoting her properly. It's like that's where everything that flows out of that space. That's the garden. That's the soil. And if that
Mhm.
soil is good and it's healthy, then what comes out of that is good and healthy. It's positive. But if
Mhm.
that space is not healthy, if it's filled with trauma, with shame, with unresolved issues, then what comes out in terms of our thinking, our mental health is not healthy.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah.
And I've had you mention a few things there. So you talked about mental. If you can help sort of distinguish these things, right? There's mental, there's heart, there's gut, there's
Mm.
brain. What's the distinction between these things? I feel like it's a bit confusing to me.
Yeah, look, it is confusing. And the words are used interchangeably, but mental has to do really with just our thinking, our
Mhm.
cognition, the thoughts that we have. And then I guess when we talk about the heart.
Sorry, let me just cut you short there. So when you say the thoughts, that has got nothing to do with the brain. Does that have to do with the
Yeah,
brain?
yeah, it does. It's I find it hard to explain, but basically our thoughts. So
Hmm.
our brain is the physical structure, right?
Right. Like the
That's
hardware.
that exactly, that's the
Yeah.
brain. But that brain influences the way that we think,
Right.
right? What we
Mm.
then call the mind. Right? How the
Uh,
mind. So when we're talking
right.
about the mind, we're talking about that. And sometimes when we talk about the heart, we're kind of like we like even in Christian circles, when we talk about the heart of the matter, right?
Mhm.
It's like we're
Yeah.
using that word in a different way, but it's still just about the way that you're thinking about things. So heart
Mhm.
and mind are kind of used interchangeably in that instance. But brain, first thing to note, the brain is over there. It's the physical thing. It's the
Right.
physical
Okay.
structure. But the
Yeah.
brain is connected to our mind in that the thoughts that we have in our mind are, without a brain, you can't have thoughts.
Yeah. Gotcha.
And if you have certain parts of your brain that are damaged, that you're not able to think a certain way,
Mhm.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
so you can't separate them. But yes,
Right.
the brain is more the physical structure.
Okay. Now, yesterday I was having a conversation with a friend of mine in Sydney. He moved in he's actually from Zimbabwe, but used to live in Nairobi, moved
Yeah.
into Sydney. And we were comparing life in Australia versus life in Kenya, for example. And
Mm,
his view was that in Australia, you have a lot of time to yourself. So you're mostly in your mind, in your thoughts.
mm,
Whereas back at home in Kenya, there's always a lot happening. You're
yeah.
always rushing, you're doing something, and almost like all your emotions are dealt with because you wake up in the morning, you're getting late, you're getting anxious, you get into, let's say, a rowdy bus, you'll get a bit agitated, you will get to the office, the boss will be a bit rough, you will feel a different type of emotion. In the evening, you'll hang out with your friends, you'll laugh about it, you'll enjoy, you go see your family, extended family, you have some good time around a campfire, etc. So it's almost like you have all expressions of the emotions being catered to, whereas
Mm,
here you're mostly everything is efficient, but then you're seated with yourself in your thoughts.
yeah.
If you is there a way as human beings we are supposed to be having all these different emotional expressions that we should be catered for or met, and it's a problem if some of them are not met? So, for example, if you're never angry, like everything is always perfect, and you never have that emotional outburst of anger, is that a problem?
Not necessarily as long as you are actually processing the emotions.
Oh, okay.
So everybody feels, right?
Mhm,
Everybody has emotion, but our emotion is kind of like on a continuum. Some people feel certain emotions more strongly than others. So some people feel anger more strongly than others.
mhm,
Some people feel like just excitement. They just know how to get my, like for myself, I'm very good at getting excited. It's just
mhm.
part of my personality. Some people are a bit more toned down. So it's not that it's wrong or it's a bad thing if somebody doesn't express a certain emotion, because expression is not or lack of expression is not necessarily a sign that you are not processing internally. So
Yeah.
some people process emotions internally, but as human beings, we are wired for love. We are wired for safety, for validation, for belonging, and our
Mhm.
emotions are how we kind of express all those things, or we connect with others in relationships.
Let me put it this way. If if somebody stays for 1 year without crying, right?
Mm.
There's been no opportunity to cry because there's been no reason to cry
Yes.
because they're in an area where there is nothing that will make them cry. Versus if this person is in an area where they get to cry, say, once a month for one reason or the other, is there a difference between these two people in terms of how well their emotional development, or I don't know whether they call it fulfillment, is concerned?
It depends on whether the person who has not cried for a year hasn't cried because there's nothing to cry about,
Mhm.
versus they have not cried because they're blocking their emotions,
Right.
which is something completely different.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Because in that instance, then it means they're not processing their emotions, and
Mm.
that's a problem.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha.
Makes
Okay.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, talking about food and mental health, any connection there? Is there um, are there are there foods that when you eat you will be mentally stable, or are there foods that when you eat you're like, okay, this is taking me down the drain?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I'm not a dietitian, but I have
Mhm,
I've read a bit, and I've got personal experience with food and food intolerances and all of that stuff. But definitely food affects our mental health.
mhm,
So our brains need certain types of food, and quite often we tend to, whether we're stressed or for whatever reason, we tend to eat food that is not good for our brains. We eat what they call junk food, or sometimes food is the term they prefer these days. So there's certain things that when we eat them, for example, highly processed foods, high sugar, all that stuff, it actually affects our brain because it can spike your blood sugar, and that's a problem. When you have your sugar spiking, that is going to actually affect your mood. And it can actually affect your levels of anxiety. If you have too much caffeine, for example, that's not a good thing because that will also affect anxiety. So, for example, when I've worked with clients in my work as a psychologist, one of the things when we're doing the treatment plan for anxiety management, for example, is to look at the diet and in particular look at caffeine and assess whether they've got caffeine in their diet. Because if they do, that's gonna, that's gonna clash with, trying to manage. You can't say you're managing anxiety and you're having high levels of caffeine. That's not going to work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that's going to kind of affect that. Yeah. So definitely there is a connection with that. And there's also inflammatory foods. There's a lot of foods that are inflammatory. The body doesn't like that, and so it's going to affect your mood. But a lot of people actually take things that affect specifically to change their mood, to feel happier, to raise their levels of serotonin or those feel good hormones. Because maybe they're not feeling, and that's what happens. Sometimes it's not intentional, but you might find when someone is depressed, for example, they'll tend to be drawn to certain types of food. And that's because that's what their brain is needing in order to raise those feel-good hormones that are low when they're feeling depressed. So then they feel a little bit happy, but it's temporary because it's not really addressing the real issue.
Okay, gotcha.
So yeah, definitely.
So you cannot ignore food. You cannot just assume that I'll eat whatever is in front of me and I'll be fine. You've got to think about it.
No, you cannot. Okay.
And I'm hearing you talk so passionately about mental health, and I'm just wondering, how did you land into this space in terms of thinking about your early beginnings and the person that you are today? Is there any level of correlation between those two before we proceed with a couple of other questions?
Yeah, definitely. So when I was younger, my mother was a social worker, and I always wanted to be a social worker. But then as I grew older, I realized the reason I thought I wanted to be a social worker was because social workers work with people, and I liked working with people. But it wasn't really social work I wanted to do. It was therapy. It was sitting in that space where you're listening to people and you get the opportunity to actually, have input in helping them solve whatever those issues are. So that was number one, being drawn to just that thing of that helping profession. But the second thing was that, long history of mental health issues in my family. And, I have a few uncles that now passed away, but there was definitely that mental health issue. And I was always drawn to that. I wanted to understand mental health, especially what they called abnormal psychology is what they called it, or psychopathology, just trying to understand, why somebody had, for example, a diagnosis like, I don't know, this particular uncle, I think he had some kind of delusional disorder, but I'm not sure if it was schizophrenia because he was never really diagnosed. I was too young to know, but there was definitely something not right. And then there was another uncle as well who passed away when I was like 3 years old. And then after that, there were many people in the family that were diagnosed, bipolar. A few people in the family had bipolar as well. So I was very, very interested in understanding that and being part of the solution.
All right. So you're talking about that history, then it kicks to mind trauma. And I want to talk about trauma in a minute. So when we talk about trauma, I'm just thinking of what exactly is happening to somebody when they're going through a traumatic experience, whether they are having it when they're younger, that traumatic experience when they're younger, or whether they're having it when they're older, what exactly is happening that's affecting them mentally?
Okay, so the best way I can explain it with trauma is that if you imagine an incident happens, whether you're young or however age, at the time that that incident happens, there is something that happens in the brain in terms of the emotions that are released in that moment, or the emotions that are felt, and also the thoughts that come, the beliefs that are formed in that moment. So for trauma to develop, you've got an incident, you've got the emotions, and you've got the thoughts or the beliefs that form, and they like together, right? And it's like a stamp in the brain.
All right.
Okay. And then you have another incident happen, another stamp in the brain. So trauma is like these stamps. If it's unprocessed trauma, it's like these stamps that are in the brain. And then what happens is people get triggered. So when trauma is unprocessed, something happens today and it triggers something from 20 years ago, because that thing has not been processed. That trauma has not been processed. And when I talk about trauma being processed, I mean, if you can imagine like a clothes cupboard, right? It's got towels, there's sheets and whatever, and everything is all over the place. When we say trauma is being processed, we mean everything is put in its place.
Right. Okay.
That's what processing trauma means. It doesn't mean erasing it. It just means everything is put where it belongs. The thoughts that were developed or the beliefs or the emotions are put where they belong, so that the brain doesn't keep associating things that are happening now with things that happened back then. So that's why it's a trigger.
You don't forget that thing that happened, but you don't relate the present with the past.
Yeah, but that only happens if the trauma has been processed. So there's different types of therapy for processing trauma. One that is really big now is something called EMDR. EMDR is a type of therapy. It stands for, make sure I say it properly, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Hope I said it right. But basically, it's just the type of trauma therapy that uses eye movements, right? To help the person who's got the trauma do that rearranging. But that rearranging, so for example, the eye movements is like the therapist would be doing kind of like something like this, and the person with the trauma is following those hands. It's called bilateral stimulation. So it's doing something to the brain. And that something is that it's like reordering those sheets and towels, right? So the impact of that EMDR therapy is that the experience doesn't have as much of a sting as it used to. So the incident might still be remembered, but it doesn't carry the same emotional load as it used to. Right? So that's trauma processing.
That's so intriguing. I'm thinking of, let's say, a soldier who's come from a war zone. They were there for maybe years, and they get into the normal, but they're waking up every middle of the night thinking that there's like, I don't know, an explosion around them, etc. In that particular example, if we're talking about processing it, I'm trying to put it in perspective. What exactly is, because I understand when you're saying putting everything in their rightful place. But for this particular example, what does processing look like? Or maybe let me pick a more relatable example, because maybe not everybody is a military officer, but let me pick an example. Somebody was abused for one reason or another when they are younger. Something happened to them. They're older now. When they're processing it with the help of a therapist or psychologist, what is that like practically? What does that look like in terms of putting everything in the right position or shelf?
Yeah. So and I'll speak about EMDR because there's many different ways of processing trauma, but I speak of EMDR because for me, it's like once you've tasted EMDR, you can't go back.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's just one of those, So whether you're talking somebody who's returned from war, somebody who was sexually abused, somebody who's been in a car accident, right? All those are traumatic events. When you're doing EMDR with them, the processing, basically, we have to make a distinction between the brain processing and the person's mind, or the person's thoughts. So when we talk about processing, it's not, with EMDR, it's not the person themselves doing the work.
Right.
That's the power of it. That's the difference. All other therapies would tend to be more talk therapy, right? But with EMDR, there's very little talk and more about letting the brain do what the brain needs to do. So the processing is not actually done by the person. So there's a step by step. It's not something you just do in one session. That you do first of all the initial assessments. You check with the person basically what the memory is. So you identify the memory that they want to process, and then you check the emotions that are associated with that memory, and then you check the level of what we call SUDS, so the subjective units of distress. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how intense is that emotion for that person when they think about that memory? So they might say something like 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10. The goal of EMDR is to get that level, those SUDS, to something like a 1 or a 2. That's when you know they've processed. Yeah. So once you've done all that, there's a lot of other questions that are asked, right, in that assessment phase. Then you also have to make sure the person has the ability to create a visual or like a calm place, so that when you're doing the EMDR processing, they don't get overwhelmed, or if they do get overwhelmed, you know how to bring them back by using their calm place or taking them to that place, right? So it's quite a process. So when you're actually doing the actual EMDR processing, you're basically getting the person to bring up the image or the memory. So in this case, it might be, the war, or I can't remember what example you use next, but whatever that thing is, they bring up the image, the emotions associated with that, and the belief they formed at the time when the trauma happened. So it might be something like, I am not safe. It might be something like, I am incompetent. Right? Whatever it is that has caused that trauma, there is a belief, there's an emotion, and there's the incident, those three things. So in that moment, in that room, when you're about to process and you get them to follow your fingers, you're basically getting them to just look at that. You do about maybe 20 to 30 of those, right? I'm just giving an example. Then you ask them, tell me what you see, or what's happening with basically you're trying to work out what's happening with the image.
Right.
They give you feedback. Keep doing that throughout the whole session. And in my experience, what tends to happen is it's like the picture changes. That's when you know there's a processing happening. The picture changes, and all of a sudden this person is saying, okay, so for example, if it had been a car accident, they'll say, okay, now I can see that the car is going towards the tree. So they start saying things that they may not have told you in talk therapy, because now it's the brain at work. Yeah. So they tell you, and then the next thing they're like, oh, I can see myself when I was 5 years old and there's a car. All of a sudden, the brain starts to go every other place where there's a memory that is similar or linked to that. So it opens up a whole lot of other things.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So then you keep processing, you go with that, you go there. You have to be very skilled, as a therapist when you're doing EMDR, and you have to make sure that the person is ready for EMDR, because it can be quite overwhelming, but it's very powerful. Yeah, so eventually you keep doing that, and you keep asking, tell me on a scale of 1 to 10, what are your levels of distress when you think about, actually I forgot to mention something. So no, I did mention it. So the belief they formed might have been something like, I am useless. Whatever the trauma might be, the belief might have been, I'm useless. So as you check the level of distress, on a scale of 1 to 10, and you also check what the belief is. And as time goes, all of a sudden, you might find that belief starts to change as well. And people start almost like having a different view, different belief about themselves.
Right.
Where they start saying, oh, it was not my fault.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So it's quite a very powerful thing, but that's how the processing happens. It's the brain that does the work. The person doesn't.
Sounds like magic to me.
It is like magic.
Yeah.
Seriously, it is.
And speaking of trauma, can it be transmitted genetically? So, for example, are there possibly parts of me that are bearing traumatic experiences of my father or grandfather, or is the transmission of trauma probably through just experiential encounters with people around us?
All of the above.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, all of the above. There is such a thing as transgenerational trauma, also known as intergenerational trauma. Yeah.
Right.
So trauma can be passed on from generation to generation. If you look at certain cultures, certain communities, you might find that the people tend to think a certain way or have certain beliefs or seem to be stuck somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. And that's intergenerational trauma. And some of it is seen in the way that we parent, it's seen in the way that we cope. It's got to do with unresolved grief, unprocessed trauma. All of that stuff creates that anything that's unprocessed will, show up in other generations, right?
Right.
So it's like a system. It's a system. So yeah, if you're talking about it being transmitted, it'd be in that manner.
Wow. Okay. So that's a bit interesting, because then if you're trying to process that for an entire community, I wonder how you do that, especially if, let's say, like the way the African American community in America, for example, they always talk about the traumatic encounters from the slavery.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, how do you process it for the entire population, which is can be
yeah,
tricky.
and that is why when you're doing trauma, when you're processing trauma, or when you're doing any kind of healing systems, you have to go deep. You can't be surface level. I mean, we don't even need to go far. We have to just even go to the Aboriginal people of this nation that we're in Australia. There's intergenerational trauma. And so part of healing that group of people, or facilitating that healing, is recognizing that their experiences are not the same as mainstream. They're unique. So the way that you provide healing, or for example, when you look at how the medical model, or the way of health, how health is conceptualized in mainstream, it's very different for Aboriginal. It's not, we don't just talk in terms of mental health and all of that. We talk more in terms of social and emotional well-being. Right. You have to also involve like the cultural. So there's a cultural aspect to it. So you don't just do the medical model, because that's not going to work. And that's about understanding that there is intergenerational trauma because of the history of the people, and because of, what happened to the group of people. So in terms of that healing, it's approaching it with, that's why there's Aboriginal medical centers, or Aboriginal community controlled organizations. That's why they were formed in the first place, right? Yeah. So
right. Okay. Now, as you will know, I'm in my midlife, and I've always had this midlife crisis. I think I probably have encountered it as well. Maybe just don't know that it's midlife crisis. Is it a thing, midlife crisis, and is there any connection between midlife crisis, if it's there, and mental health?
Look, there's different, in life we go through different phases, and when you look at mental health and how mental health affects men versus women, it's very different. It affects people of one personality different from the next personality. It affects people of different life stages differently. So when you think about the whole concept of a midlife crisis, it's really kind of talking about the fact that this person, or this individual, is going through a transition. Right? It just happens to be in their midlife, right?
Right. Okay.
Yes. So, but we are constantly going through some kind of transition. When someone goes through puberty, that's a transition. When
Mm-hmm.
someone gets pregnant, that's a transition, right? Menopause, transition, right? Retiring, transition.
Right.
So when we talk about the idea of a midlife crisis, we have to look at, for that individual, what is happening in their lives, right?
Right.
What specifically is happening. So the reason they're going through a midlife crisis is that there is a transition there happening, and we need to be able to identify for them in particular, what is that transition? What's that change that is happening for them? And why is it happening? What are the factors involved in that transition, and what is in place to support them through that transition? Because we know in order to get through any transition, you need to have the right supports in place, the right systems in place. If they're not there, then we're going to have a problem. That transition is not going to happen smoothly.
Okay. All right. So is there any tip for me or for anybody who is in that transition? Do they see a coach? What do they do? Like, if you're going through any sort of transition, is that the reason why everybody needs therapy at some point when they're having major transitions in their lives?
Look, I'm biased because I'm, a therapist. So I think everybody needs therapy. I think therapy is
So sorry, is there somebody who does not need therapy? You've said everybody, but think about, like, are there strong men? I don't know. I'm told there's some strong African men who don't need therapy.
Okay, let me correct you there.
Okay. Correct.
Therapy
Yeah.
and the need for therapy has nothing to do with somebody's strength,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
You can still be very, very strong and need
Yeah.
therapy. But I think that there's sometimes a misunderstanding of what therapy is, right? And some of that, I blame, especially as Africans, I blame culture, and the messages that we're sent about therapy. You see, over recent years, I don't know if you've ever heard this before. There's a lady called Brene Brown, and she talks a lot about vulnerability and the power of vulnerability. Vulnerability is so powerful. It's one of the best kept secrets.
Yeah.
Because the person who knows how to be vulnerable is very courageous, and it's the best gift you can give yourself. Because when you are vulnerable, or when you allow yourself to be vulnerable, you allow yourself to kind of essentially let your heart be naked.
Yeah.
And not see it as a sign of weakness or failure. But I think that for some of us, especially from our African culture, the message has just been that, okay, a sign, especially for men, unfortunately, the sign of being strong is that, you handle things on your own and you do this and you do that. But unfortunately for African men, there's high rates of suicide. And it's because of that very reason. It's because there's shame that has been attached to the idea of needing support, or the idea of actually opening up and sharing what you're going through. But if you think about it, like, I don't even know why this is a thing. But when you think about it, when a boy child is born and a girl child is born, both are equally treated like they need their mother, that they need their mother's milk, they need their mother's protection. But somewhere along the way, because of socialization, we start sending this message that differentiates the boy from the girl. And that's where the problem is. I'm not saying boys and girls are not different, but I'm saying that the difference that we instill is actually quite damaging. When it's telling boys that they can't cry, they can't talk about their emotions, being a man, men don't cry. I think that's a whole lot of rubbish, really. It's very damaging. And that's why, statistically, last time I checked, women tend to live longer than men, right? And part of it, I really believe it is because of the fact that men don't get the opportunity to actually share their stresses the same way women do. Women process their issues or their emotions verbally. They're verbal processes generally. Men tend to internalize. And I think some of that is not that those men are naturally internalizers. I think they're socialized to internalize. because they're told this message that, oh, part of being a man is, just keep it to yourself, or don't talk about your problems. Take a group of women, they've just met already, they know each other's life story. I'm not saying that's always a good thing, but generally that's how women are.
Yeah.
They just talk. You know what I mean? They open up because they've been doing it since they were small. But as boys, from when they're small, they just wipe those tears. Boys don't cry. A real man. This is what a real man. You know what I mean? And then if the boy cries, they're called names. So they're punished for showing emotion, right? So all the more reason why they withdraw from being vulnerable. So in terms of tips, what was the question again? What was the tips about?
No, this about midlife crisis and the navigating that and how women process it differently. But I think
you were asking about therapy, coaching, and all of that. I was saying I think everybody needs a therapist. And you were asking if there are people who don't need that. I would have to say therapy, the way that we know it, especially in the Western world, is kind of generally like one-on-one sessions. But when you think about it, we do therapy in our cultures. We just don't call it that. It's just that it's not a one-on-one, right? It's sitting down with a group of other people. It's going out with a group of men and going hunting. You know what I mean? It's because therapy is about it's about that opportunity to open up, connect, and do life together and actually share the load, the emotional load, right? That's what it is. So
Nice. That's great. Okay. Are there any top tips apart from going for therapy? Any top tips for us to maintain a healthy mental state?
Yep. I would have to I'm trying to think about it for myself in terms of how I maintain. So for myself, I've never really, actually, I shouldn't say I've never, I was going to say I've never really experienced depression, but I mean in the clinical sense, but I have experienced low mood and very low mood. And that was years ago. I had really, because I grew up as genetically, we have obesity in my family. So I grew up with that obesity issue, and I experienced a lot of bullying or teasing, let me say, when I was growing up. So that was always an issue for me, managing weight and all of that stuff. And it caused a lot of trauma. My trauma was related to my weight and all of that stuff. So whenever I would feel low mood, it would be connected to that. So that's when I experienced low mood. But the thing I've experienced as well is anxiety. I was always kind of like a socially anxious person, especially when I had to do public speaking. Even though I was a kid who talked a lot, like I talked to people say I talk too much. I just loved talking, right? But I would experience anxiety if I was all of a sudden the attention was on me. So over the years, I've kind of learned how to manage those emotions. But the big thing that I do is I think I'm getting better. I've always been good at being, what's the word? Honoring my nervous system. And I'll explain what I mean, right? I feel like a lot of people don't honor their nervous system. So when you think about our brain and what happens when we face the way our brain works is that there's a part of our brain which we call the animal brain, or the more primitive part of our brain, right? The limbic system. That is the part we call survival. That's where the survival part of our brain. So when we face a dangerous animal like a lion, something happens in that part of our brain where we go into survival, and there's hormones released, like we've got cortisol, which is the stress hormone, adrenaline, right? The body gets ready to fight or flee or freeze, right? From that dangerous animal. Unfortunately, our brains can't tell the difference between a lion and perception of danger. So it basically does the same thing with a lion as it would with the thought that
speaking.
They're looking at me the wrong way. That person doesn't like me. That person is a threat, right? So then the same process happens biologically, and you have those things, and then you're in that space. You're triggered, essentially. And then you're kind of like in that space. So part of learning how to manage that for yourself is having that understanding about what's going on in your brain. And then learning to regulate. Emotion regulation is one of the most powerful tools that anyone can have. The ability to recognize that, okay, right now I'm dysregulated. A lot of people don't know when they're dysregulated, right? They just think you might be in the middle of a conversation and you've been in that conversation and then you get triggered and you don't pick that you've just been triggered. So you keep going in the conversation. But it's really important to understand I've actually been triggered. It took me years to understand that and then realize, and now I know. So for some people, something happens in their head. For some people, the heart beats fast. Some people sweaty palms. It's different for each person. But that ability to recognize that, ooh, I'm in fight, flight, freeze mode. It's a clue. Once that happens, you have to disengage.
Step away,
right? Step away. But the reason you're disengaging is so that you can allow yourself, because this is what happens. I'll explain it like this. When we look at the brain and how it works, it's like this is the more primitive part of our brain. And then this is the other part that sits there. That's what we call the prefrontal cortex, right? That is responsible for executive functioning. So our ability to plan, to be logical, right? And all of to reason. When we go into fight, flight, freeze mode, that part of the brain, it's almost like shuts down. And we're now in our animal brain. That's why when you find somebody who's very, very angry, they've been triggered, it's like they've lost their mind.
They can't reason.
Think. They can't reason because that part has shut down. So part of learning to regulate, the whole goal of it is to get this part and this part to be reunited. Right? And in order to get them to be reunited, so you can be logical again, right? So you can be reasonable, you have to do the deep breathing. That's why when you're doing therapy and they teach you about anxiety, they talk about deep breathing. It's not deep breathing for the sake of just deep breathing. It's to allow you to do deep breathing in the diaphragm, where you're breathing through the diaphragm, as opposed to from the chest. Because when you are in that fight flight mode, you breathe from the chest, right? So your job is to now breathe from the diaphragm because the two cannot coexist.
Right. Okay.
So that's the purpose of doing the deep breathing. And as you do that, you're sending a message that false alarm, there's no lion.
Okay. But because otherwise then your sympathetic nervous system is kicked in and your guns blazing and
exactly. So so that appreciation of your nervous system and actually honoring it is really important. And actually something's just come to mind. I don't know why, but I'm just thinking, for example, if you look at, from my observation, our African culture, we take our kids and we say, come and say hello to so-and-so. The kid is refusing. Refusing. Normally, let's say they would comply because we train our kids to be compliant. It's part of our culture. But you have this child refusing. You tell them off. You're being disrespectful, right? And we force this child to go and engage. And then the adult, whoever it is, they're like, come, give me a hug.
All right.
They give the child a hug, right? What we've just done there is teach that child how to dishonor their nervous system. Because in that moment, we're only seeing the outside reaction, but they're actually reacting because their nervous system is saying.
Is that why we always yes men? Like whatever, do this, yes, even if it's dangerous and harmful and.
Look, definitely there's many reasons why somebody is like that, but definitely if you're from our African culture, I would say chances are very high that you were trained to be compliant, even to your own detriment. And then when you're older, you don't know how, you don't have a voice, you don't know how to say anything different.
Right.
You know?
Ooh, okay. From a Bible perspective, because you are a pastor as well, is there any messaging that touches on mental health and having a healthy mental sort of state?
There's a few. The Bible talks in the book of Romans about verse 2, just like the whole thing about do not conform to the pattern.
Chapter 12, verse 2.
Of this world. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Yeah.
Right? So that's really talking about our need to recognize that transformation comes when we make the decision to engage our mind, to renew our mind. Why are we renewing it? Because it needs a shift. It needs there's old patterns, old ways, right? A lot of reasons why people struggle to change in many areas is because of old patterns that are sitting there that we're not willing to unlearn. When it talks about renewing, it's really about saying, be willing to unlearn old patterns. Some of us are holding on to old patterns, so there's that issue about renewing of your mind. And then, of course, there's the whole scripture that talks about be anxious for nothing.
Yeah. Philippians 4:6.
Yes. So that's a very big thing there. And then there's the one that talks about, guard your heart.
Above all else, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It talks about, the scripture talks about the heart is deceitful.
Yeah.
Above all else. Whenever I see that scripture, I think about the fact that we have blind spots. Even though it's saying heart, you think about we've got blind spots. You know how I said earlier that, we use those words interchangeably.
Yeah.
Right? So the heart is deceitful. So we have blind spots. There's parts of ourselves that we are not aware of. There's versions of ourselves that we haven't met yet.
Yeah.
So that's why things like coaching matter, the things like therapy matter. And there is a difference between therapy and coaching. Sometimes we need coaching in certain areas. Sometimes we need therapy because you can't, if you try and do coaching without doing the therapy, you meet a roadblock. You'll only go so far.
Okay.
Because therapy goes deep and digs up, right? And digs up what the real root issue is, right? Whereas coaching assumes you've already done the digging up and you're ready to run. But a lot of us don't want to go through all that other hard work of processing because it's painful, and we don't want to experience that emotional pain. But it's one of the best things you can ever do for yourself is to process trauma.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna give you one last challenge, and I hope it's not traumatic. And then, and then after we'll probably just close with one or two more questions, and we
Sure.
out of here. So this, look, this you 100% know these songs. That one I have no doubt.
Okay.
My problem is I don't think you would easily tell the title of a song. You might know the singer or the group, but I doubt you will get the title right. Anyway, let me just give it a try, see if you how you go. So the first one, higher than the mountains I face, stronger than the power of the grave, constant through the trial and the change. Now, if I say the last line, that'll be the name of a song. So I'm just leaving that for now.
If you sang it,
higher than the mountains I face. Okay.
I feel like it's a hill song. That's all I can say.
Okay.
No?
So you are beyond
it's not
help.
even a hill song.
One thing remains, Jesus culture. I'm sure this is sung in church every other time.
I don't even think we've sung that song in church.
But you know one thing remains.
I know it.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Now I'm going to give you another one here real quick. Nothing can separate, even if I run away. I will skip that next line because that's the title of a song. Then I'll go to the next verse. I know I still make mistakes, but you have new mercies for me every day. And I'll skip the next line because that's the title of a song.
Now,
your love never fails. Okay, that's the title of a song. Your love never fails by Jesus Culture again.
How does it go? I need to hear the tune.
You stay the same through the changes. And
sing that line.
So which one's that?
That you stay the same.
No, I don't have it written down here, but it's a super common song. And I'm not the best of singers, especially with a flu. So you've got to bear
Fair
with me.
enough. Fair enough. Yeah.
You've got to bear with me. Now we're about to get to a close. We've got 4 minutes to go. I just wanted to touch on, is there a way of distinguishing the normal humanistic emotional responses that you will have to various stimuli in life versus when there's actually a problem, underlying problem that's significant enough to be addressed. So what I mean is, like, if you think about this scenario we talked about where you're having a conversation with people and then you get your heart starting to beat, there's palpitations, there's all manner of reactions. At what point do you say, "Oh, that's just how, as a human being, I will react," versus where you say, "I think I actually have a bigger problem than I'm thinking or I'm imagining." Is there a way of distinguishing, or do we address this at the same level?
I think there is a way of distinguishing in the diagnostic manual for mental health disorders, so DSM, for something to be identified as a disorder, it's not based on the symptoms by themselves. It's like, so there's usually criterion A, criterion B, criterion C. One of the criterion is, and this is the distinguishing factor, the level of dysfunction it causes. So a behavior, you can observe a behavior, same behavior in two people. And in one person, it causes dysfunction, and in another, it doesn't. And when we talk about dysfunction, we're talking about dysfunction in terms of the person's occupation, the person's relationships, the person's, personality. So basically anything that now shifts you from being able to function properly, then it's something worth focusing on and thinking, okay, there's a problem here. Because any other problem you can look at and say, oh yeah, that happens. You can dismiss it, but it doesn't cause this. It's not disruptive to your everyday life.
Yeah.
That's what I mean when I say dysfunction. But if all of example, you find, oh yeah, I don't want to go out because, I might have a panic attack, or I don't want to do that because they might laugh at me, right? That's dysfunction in your social relationships. That's a problem. So that's the distinguishing factor, not the fact that you're feeling, because people will feel those emotions all the time at different levels. That is the normal bit. It's when it now causes dysfunction to the point where it changes your relationships, it changes your desire, your appetite, your wanting to wake up, your sleep patterns.
Right.
Once it gets to that, then there's dysfunction, then there's a problem.
Okay, understood.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Are there any exercises from a mental health perspective? I know we talked about breathing exercises, box breathing, and all that. I'm thinking of somebody's going for an interview, they're sweating crazy, or you're going to make a presentation and you're just like, oh my God, I think I'm going to collapse. Is there any quick wins that people could actually do?
Yeah, look, there's always the deep breathing, there's learning to do meditation, right? And there's grounding techniques, right? Being able to kind of ground yourself, as in like, okay, be in the present moment as opposed to your thoughts going to the future or the past. Soothing activities, so using your five senses to soothe, right, your environment. So your environment has to be soothing to you. How you set up your office, how you set up your car. For example, I love the color purple. So you find I always have purple things around me. I like odd looking things. So this pencil case is shaped like a pencil, right? But that's also part of my personality. So you have to have things around you that kind of like those little things that matter. But soothing activities, when you talk about sense of smell, that's why they have like aromatherapy, right? The type of music, some people like to listen to jazz, some classical, right? That's soothing, right? The things that you allow your eyes to see, that some people it's the things they feel, some people it's the way, the smells, right? Spray this in a little cloth that you carry with you in your wallet. And
even men will do that.
Yes. Yeah, even men. Well, men wear cologne, right? So there's no reason why a man can't take cologne and put it on a cloth, a little piece of cloth and keep that in his wallet. And then when he puts that against his nostrils, it does something. All of this is all brain work. It does something to the brain. It's soothing. Because remember, the whole idea of soothing, it's like when a baby's crying and they're unsettled, what do? We take that baby and we, or that. It's the same thing you're doing for yourself when we talk about soothing, right? Doing the, so it's soothing activities. But apart from that, when you find yourself having panic or sweating or anything, there might be a deeper problem. And that's about trauma that is unprocessed.
Right. Okay. Because the last time I was doing a training, oh man, I was sweating and I was going to the bathroom like 6 times. I was like, oh my God. And then finally, when I stood to make the presentation, everything was fine. I mean, but that was years back.
Yeah. I know. That's just, anxiety from social. Yeah, that might just be that.
Right. Excellent. This has been quite eye-opening, informative. My goodness, this is, I think, like they always say, in other places, there's a lot of payment you need to make for such information, but we've got it free. Thank you so much for being generous with your time and knowledge and experience as well. Really appreciate it. I think this actually deserves a part 2 at some point in 2026, God willing. And thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. Or actually, I invited myself, didn't
I? No. You are on the list. Like I said, there's a list, but I just moved you up the list.
You moved me up the list. Thank you for indulging me.
No, thank you so much again.
No, it was great.
Have yourself a good one. Good evening.
Yes, thank you. You're traveling soon, aren't you?
Yeah. Traveling this Friday.
I want to see you before you travel. Have a safe trip.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, looking forward to that. Going through Singapore, Addis Ababa, then Nairobi. So it's just a nice 28-hour trip, but it's good.
Wow.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Yeah.
All right, you take care. Thank you so much. It was fun.
All right. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.